Chapter 1. The Inheritance. The house waited for him. It stood hunched on a bald patch of land just off County Road 57, its silhouette jagged against the slate sky like a crooked tooth jutting from dead gums. 3 stories of rotting wood, windows like cataract-collapsed eyes, porch half-collapsed and slouched with the weight of years. It had no welcome in it, just hunger. Mason Weller pulled up in his rusting Honda, engine wheezing its death rattle, and killed the ignition. The silence that followed felt personal, as if the house had noticed him. He stepped out, boot hitting the gravel with a crunch that echoed too loudly. The air smelled like wet leaves, rusted metal, and something under that sweet and spoiled, like fruit left in a sealed jar too long. He lit a cigarette with a trembling hand and stared up at the place that had somehow become his gift. That's what the lawyer had said, a gift from Uncle Roy. No funeral, no warning, just a thick envelope and a brass key so cold it felt wet. He hadn't seen Roy in nearly 2 decades. Last he remembered, the old bastard had shown up at his mother's funeral wearing a coat that reeked of sulfur and smiled too wide at the casket. Said something about the dead being close tonight. That was Roy, the family's roach. Strange, unkillable, always whispering about charged objects and sympathetic vibrations. Now the roach was dead, and the house was Mason's. The front door groaned open like a throat clearing. Inside, the air hit him like a wall, thick, still, and cold enough to bite. The light was weak, the kind of milky gray that never quite reached the corners. He could smell mildew, mothballs, and beneath that, something coppery. The hallway stretched narrow and long, lined with water-damaged portraits of people whose eyes had been scratched out with something sharp. The wallpaper had curled in on itself like dried flesh. Something dripped slowly in the distance. Tick, tick. Mason stepped deeper inside, his boots sticking slightly with each movement, the floorboards groaning under his weight like they resented being woken. He didn't speak, didn't call out. The house wasn't the type to answer kindly. He found the basement door behind a grandfather clock that had long since stopped ticking. The door was small and unassuming, but the handle was worn smooth from too much use. When he turned it, the metal felt strangely warm. The stairs creaked with every step downward. The deeper he went, the colder it got, like the darkness was pressing on him, trying to smother the heat from his skin. His flashlight beam wobbled across exposed pipes, ancient wood, and spider webs fat with things that still moved. The basement was large, unfinished, dirt floor in some patches, stone in others. Mason turned in a slow circle until the beam hit something unusual. An iron door set into the back wall. Didn't match anything else in the house. The metal was blackened, scorched around the edges. Bolts sealed it in 6 places. A combination lock dangled from the handle. A note was taped beside it, the paper old and brittle, the ink spidery and frantic. Don't sell. Don't touch. Don't trust them. Mason stared at the lock, then at the note, then back at the lock. There was something about this room, this door, that made the hair on his arm stand up. Not from fear, exactly, but from recognition. Like a smell that pulls a memory out of your chest you didn't know was there. It took him nearly 2 hours to crack the combination. When the last bolt came free, the door opened on a breath of air so cold it burned. The smell that poured out hit him hard, dust, rot, wax, and something underneath it all that made his stomach twist. The room beyond was no bigger than a walk-in closet, but every inch of it was packed. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, cluttered with objects that hummed in the air, not audibly but vibrationally. Mason could feel them in his teeth. A child's shoe with scorched laces. A hand mirror so black it seemed to absorb light. a cracked porcelain doll with one milky eye and something dried under her fingernails. A ring in a small box, the velvet inside still wet. Each item had a brown paper tag tied to it with twine, handwritten in the same jittery scrawl. Screaming coin. Do not listen. Mother's claw. Never bury. Clarabelle, do not rock. Some were labeled in Latin, some in languages Mason didn't recognize. One had no tag at all, just a small child's tooth, set alone on a velvet pillow, yellowed and glistening. Mason stepped into the room. The air was heavy, the walls close. The light from his flashlight sputtered, dimmed, then came back. The artifacts weren't just things. They were waiting. He didn't believe in curses, not really. Mason believed in addiction, in bad choices, in entropy. But as he stood there, breathing in the metallic, meaty air of this tomb his uncle had built, something stirred in the deepest part of him. And it wasn't fear. It was curiosity. That was his first mistake. Second was thinking he was in control. Chapter 2. The Open Sign. The sign flickered like a dying heartbeat. A square of red neon, half the letters blown, hanging in the front window like a trap. Open, or, depending on how the buzz went, O_EN, which Mason thought was somehow more honest. He'd spent 3 straight days cleaning the place. Bleached the walls until the ghosts of old water stains bled through anyway, swept dust that came back minutes later, hauled every artifact upstairs from the basement room, carrying them like sleeping children, careful not to touch skin to object, even wrapped some in cloth, like they might wake up angry. He didn't know why he was doing it, not really. Survival, maybe, or some grim instinct that told him if he displayed the things, kept them watched, they might behave. The museum opened on a Friday. No ceremony, no fanfare, just a crooked wooden sign on the lawn and the glowing red letters that refused to die. The first visitor was a woman with blue hair and teeth like a ferret. She walked through slowly, phone out, snapping photos until the mirror turned her camera black. She left without paying. The second was a man who wouldn't stop staring at the doll. She moved, he said. Mason didn't answer. She had. Clarabelle, the cracked porcelain doll with the faded gingham dress and the one milky eye, had been placed behind a sheet of glass, nailed shut and sealed with epoxy. He'd even drawn a little chalk circle beneath her chair for good measure. Not that he believed in it. Not then. But that night, after locking up, Mason walked back through the gallery with a beer in one hand and fatigue humming behind his eyes. And stopped, cold. She was gone. The case was intact, glass clean, chalk ring unbroken. But Clarabelle wasn't there. He found her sitting in the east room, on the edge of the chess lounge, legs swinging slightly above the floor. Her head was turned just enough to seem aware of him. He put her back in the case, said nothing, didn't sleep well. The dreams came jagged and wet, hallways that twisted like intestines, whispers in voices that sounded like his mother, his ex, himself. At one point, he felt something heavy crawl across his chest, lean close, and say, "You left the lights on, Mason." When he jerked awake, the museum wing was lit. Every bulb, every display, even the exit sign over the back door, which hadn't worked in years, was glowing bright red. He unplugged everything. The next night, it happened again. And the next. It was more than the lights. Cold spots moved through the rooms, pockets of air that sucked the breath right out of your lungs. Mason started waking up, unable to move, paralyzed with his eyes wide open, his mind screaming while something watched from the ceiling. Not stood, watched. He couldn't see it, but he knew. Felt it in his bones, in the piss-warm sweat pooling at his spine. He tried burning sage, tried Catholic prayers he remembered wrong, tried whiskey. None of it worked. One morning, he came downstairs to find all the tags had changed. Still the same brown paper, the same scratchy ink, but different messages. He's inside the walls. She wants to come out. The doll is never where you left her. We see you. He tore them down, wrote fresh ones, taped them back with shaking hands. A few days later, a local teen stopped by, bright-eyed, ironic, wearing a hoodie that said, "This is my ghost hunting shirt." She made it as far as the second display case before backing up, fast, face pale. "What's behind the mirror?" she asked. Mason didn't look. "There's nothing behind it," he said. She stared at him for a long time. "I think something's looking out," she whispered. After she'd left, Mason stood in front of the mirror. The glass was blacker than usual. He thought he saw a faint outline, tall, blurry, maybe just the room behind him. Maybe. That night, the doll was gone again. This time, he didn't find her until morning, seated in his kitchen, hands folded neatly in her lap. There was something red under her fingernails. He didn't ask. Fading cluned. Well, exercise, one might think. Just picked her up with tongs and carried her back to the case, set her down, locked it tight. As he turned to leave, the lights flickered once, and the sign in the window buzzed back to life. Open, even though the door was locked, even though the hours said closed, even though Mason hadn't flipped the switch. He stared at it for a long time. That night, the museum hummed softly to itself, like a throat full of broken glass, and Mason, wide-eyed and still, lay in bed with the covers up to his chin and the whispers curling through the vents like smoke. Chapter 3. The First Incident. The cops never came. No one reported her missing until the next day. By then, Lana Garrett was already part of the house. It started with the lock. Mason found it twisted the wrong way, pried open like someone had fed it teeth. The back door was ajar, wind breathing through the screen, carrying with it the sharp scent of iron and wet soil. He didn't panic. Not at first. Kids broke into places like this all the time. It was practically a rite of passage in towns like these. Dare each other to touch the doll, steal a photo with the bleeding wall, laugh about it online. But nothing was missing. That's what made his stomach drop. The cases were untouched. No glass broken, no footprints on the dust-choked floor. Just wrongness. A displaced air, like the house had been holding its breath all night and was now exhaling poison. He checked the cameras. Mason had wired in 4 of them, cheap, motion-singular things, but they'd worked fine until now. The feed was glitchy, choked with static and lag, but one camera, the one in the west hallway, caught her. Lana, she didn't have a costume yet. Her skinny, sharp-edged, hoodie too big. She moved like she didn't care what she woke up. She strolled in at 2:37 a.m., flashlight bobbing in her hand. Her face was cocky, grinning in the dark like she was the predator, like the house was something to conquer. She took selfies in front of the mirror, flipped off the mannequin in the veil, held her phone up to the cracked painting of the burning house and said something Mason couldn't hear, but the shape of her lips looked like, "This place is bullshit." Held her, and then she found the ring. Isabel's ring. Neverwhere. It sat in its velvet-lined case, red stone pulsing faintly even in the grayscale footage. She hesitated, just for a breath, then popped the case open like it owed her money. She slipped it on. The feed glitched. It hemmed. In one frame, Lana stood, smiling. In the next, she was staring directly into the camera. Not her face anymore. Her skin had gone pale, like milk left too long in the sun. Eyes wide, mouth slightly parted. Blood trickled from her left nostril. Then she turned. Mason hit pause. Rewind. There, just for a second, something behind her, Something tall, black suit, no face, just a suggestion of shoulders, of shape. The reflection in the mirror was wrong, too. In it, she wasn't smiling. She was screaming. Mason, fast forward. The footage stuttered, skipped, then static, then silence. The next morning, she was gone. No call, no cops. Her parents assumed she'd crashed at a friend's house, but Mason knew. He found her phone the next day. Not on a display shelf, not tucked under a bench. It was inside the case, sitting beside the ring, which was back on its pillow, the stone now cracked down the center. The phone was unlocked. One photo, a blurry shot, taken just before the feed cut out. Lana in the frame, holding the ring up to the camera. And behind her, clearer than Mason remembered, something in the dark. It didn't have eyes. Didn't need them. It was watching. The phone vibrated once in his hand, screen flickering. Then it went black. Dead. He dropped it into the drawer with the rest of the lost things. Didn't tell anyone. That night, Mason dreamed of the hallway. Only this time, he wasn't watching Lana. She was watching him. In the dream, she stood in the gallery, hair wet, lips blue. The ring gleamed on her finger, pulsing like a heartbeat. Her mouth moved, soundless. He woke up, gasping, the taste of dirt in his mouth. The next morning, her name was written in the dust on the mirror. It's not once. Lana. 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 Over and over, each time shakier, each time closer to the center. He wiped it clean with shaking hands. Didn't look at his reflection. Couldn't, because in the corner of the glass something was standing behind him. Chapter 4. The Man in the Mirror. The mirror was never meant to be displayed. It had been tucked in the back of the storage room, draped in black cloth, the tag nearly illegible from water damage and time. Only one line remained readable, scrawled in that spidery, frantic hand Mason now knew too well. Never turn your back. It was tall, 7 feet at least, framed in tarnished silver carved with grotesque faces, grimacing, weeping, screaming silently into the void. The glass itself was thick, wavy with age, and darker than it should have been. Not dusty, dark, like smoke trapped beneath the surface. Mason didn't want to put it out, but space was running thin and something about the mirror pulled, like gravity, or guilt. He'd propped it in the east wing under a soft light, turned the tag over so no one would read it. For a few days, nothing happened, until he saw the man. It started in flashes. He'd walk past and think, did I just... A figure. Behind him, too tall, pale, always in the corner of the reflection. But when Mason turned, the room was empty. Then the figure got closer. Each time he passed the mirror, it inched forward, 1 foot closer, then another, then, right behind his shoulder. No eyes, no mouth, just absence, a blankness shaped like a man, skin stretched too tight over bones that didn't make sense. He wore a black suit that seemed to shimmer with something oily, like looking at gasoline on water. Mason stopped going near the east wing. Didn't matter. The man came anyway. He started seeing him in the reflection of the microwave, in windows, in puddles, just there, behind him, still, silent, waiting. And then the mirror began to breathe. The glass fogged in the mornings, condensation rolling down the surface like sweat on skin. Mason wiped it clean. It came back faster, stronger. Sometimes words would appear in the fog. What sits around? I'm here. One night, Mason sat in the kitchen and stared into the old toaster oven's reflection. He didn't eat, just sat, jaw clenched, eyes sunken. And behind him, In the warped silver of the toaster's side panel, the man stood again. Only this time, the reflection smiled. Mason didn't. That night, he tried covering the mirror. Black cloth, duct tape, even a heavy canvas painting leaned against it. But no matter how much he sealed it, by morning it was exposed again. Cloth peeled back, the painting knocked to the floor. Worse still, the reflection began to disappear. He'd blink, and his mirrored self would linger just a moment too long, not frozen, watching, smiling. Once his reflection walked away before he did. Mason locked himself in the bedroom that night, pushed a dresser in front of the door, stared at the closet mirror until sunrise, too afraid to blink. It only escalated. He began losing time. 10 minutes, an hour. He'd find himself in rooms he didn't remember walking into. Once he came to standing in the basement, barefoot, mirror shards in his hands. Another time he woke up in the backyard at dawn, shirt soaked in dew, fingernails caked with something dark and flaking. He dreamed in reverse. In one dream, he was behind the mirror, watching himself lie. In another, he was the man, standing over Mason's bed, breathing through a mouth that didn't exist, leaning close enough to whisper without sound. One morning, Mason found the bathroom mirror cracked. A smear of blood trailed down its surface like a finger dragged through it. Below, in the sink, lay a tooth. Odd is. The mirror in the east wing remained pristine. One night, desperate, Mason dragged it outside, set it in the yard, smashed it with a crowbar until his arms gave out. The glass didn't break, but his reflection did. It fractured in place, spiderweb cracks racing across his double's face. Mason stumbled back as the man in the mirror reached forward, palm pressing against the other side. From the real world, nothing. From the glass, a muffled sound, like a scream under ice. He buried the mirror, 3 feet down, in the woods behind the house, covered it in salt, wrapped it in chains, whispered every half-remembered protection prayer he could find online, stumbled home, muddy, exhausted, broken. Slept for 2 days. On the third morning, the mirror was back, in the east wing, propped exactly where it had been, not a scratch on the glass. This time, the tag had changed. Same paper, same handwriting. "Thank you. I see you now." And Mason? He didn't look away. Not anymore. Chapter 5. Voices from the basement. The hum returned first. Low, electric, and flesh-deep. It vibrated through the floorboards like a tuning fork held to the marrow. It came at night, always night, seeping up through the foundation like mold, setting Mason's molars on edge, and tickling the place behind his eyes where thoughts got stuck. He tried to ignore it. Tried sleeping with headphones in, tried blasting white noise, tried whiskey, then NyQuil, then both. But the hum didn't need ears. It got in through the blood. It wasn't alone. The voices came next. At first, just in the background of his exhaustion. Words spoken too close, breathy and broken, but never quite clear. Mason would freeze in the hallway, head cocked, heart skipping like a scratched record. Then they became words. "Don't turn around. You're bleeding again, Mason." He never told you about the pit, did he? They came from the basement. He hadn't gone down in a week, not since the mirror came back. But the voices didn't care. They rose through the floor like smoke. Male, female, old, young. Some wept. Some laughed. Some whispered in a tone so sweet it made his stomach flip like bad milk. He started recording them. Sat the phone on the top basement step at midnight, hit record, then slammed the door shut and waited with a hammer in his lap and sweat bleeding down his back. In the morning he played it back. At first, static. Then, faintly, Mason. Mason Ray Weller. His full name. Not a common whisper, not a trick of memory. The voice was a man's, low and wet, like a throat full of worms. That a woman. He said he loved her, but buried the heart. I was 7. They put me in the jar. The voices overlapped, grew louder, more panicked, pleading, mocking. Mason fast-forwarded. At 3:17 a.m., a voice spoke clearly, cutting through the others like a scalpel through silk. You're already part of us. Then came another voice, different, familiar. Uncle Roy, clear as a bell, like he was sitting right there in the room. You need to end it, Mass. You need to burn it all. I tried. I failed. They got into my blood, into my mouth. Don't listen to them. Don't trust them. Mason stopped the recording. His mouth was dry, his palms slick. He stood at the basement door, key in hand, for nearly 5 minutes before opening it. The Hume hit him in the throat. The stairs groaned as he descended. Cold wrapped around his legs like wet rope. The air was thick with something unnatural, like meat turned sweet and spoiled, left too long in a locked room. He reached the bottom and flicked on the light. It didn't help. The shelves were moving. Not dramatically, just a twitch, a tremor, as if the objects were breathing. The tags fluttered. The lights buzzed. The mirror, shoved face down under an old tarp, shivered gently, like something underneath was dreaming. Louder, down there. Mason realized, with ice dripping through his spine, that they weren't just in the room, they were inside his head. The way they knew things. They told him about his DUI in 18, the night he woke up on the sidewalk, blood down his chin, windshield spider-webbed. They whispered about Lana, her fingers, her tongue, the ring still warm on her hand when she disappeared. You didn't try to stop her. You wanted to see what would happen. Now you know. He tried to leave but couldn't, his legs locked, eyes drawn to a spot on the far wall where the stone had blackened over time. No, not blackened. Burned. A circle, like something alive had scorched its way through. Mason stepped closer. The stone was warm. He pressed his palm to it. The whispering stopped. All of it. Total silence. And then something on the other side whispered back. Just 3 words. Let me out. Mason fell backward, smacked his head on the floor. When he came to, he was upstairs, in his bed, clothes damp, breath ragged. The clock read 4:06 a.m. The phone was beside him. Calling. He played it. Silence. Then, Uncle Roy's voice again, barely above a whisper. You're the door, Mason. You've always been the door. He stared at the phone until sunrise, then walked to the mirror room and stared into his reflection. This time it stared back, smiling, holding something small and wet. It was his tongue, still twitching. Chapter 6. The dollhouse. He didn't remember bringing it upstairs. The dollhouse sat in the foyer like it had always been there, dustless, untouched by time, perfect. He must have retrieved it from the basement at some point. That was the only explanation. Except he hadn't, at least not consciously. It was a perfect replica of the museum. 3 floors, wraparound porch, stone steps leading to a tiny front door the size of a thumbprint, shingles painted the same mossy gray as the real thing. Each window complete with fragile panes, no thicker than fingernail shavings. He made it. Identical. The east gallery, the parlor, the cursed mirror, the basement stairs, all there, detailed down to imperfections. The scratch in the wallpaper by the kitchen door, the crooked banister Mason had stubbed his toe on a dozen times. And the basement, yes, the basement was there too. He lifted the dollhouse's tiny roof with a trembling hand and peered down into the miniature basement. There were shelves down there, miniature tags, little brown scraps of paper too small to read without a magnifying glass. But what made his stomach crawl wasn't the detail. It was the figures. There were dolls, inside the tiny house. Not many, just one at first. It wore a miniature flannel shirt, had dark hair like his, and stood frozen in the doll-sized foyer with one hand on the knob of the miniature basement door. Mason leaned in closer, breath fogging the tiny window. The doll's head was turned toward him. He jerked back. No, that wasn't possible. He sat down on the floor, blinking hard, forcing a laugh out of his throat. He was tired, that was all. No sleep, no food, no balance. His brain was rearranging the furniture on its own now. But when he looked again, the figure had moved. It stood in the kitchen now, Elkin facing the wall, arms limp at its sides. Mason's breath hitched. The air had grown thicker somehow, syrupy and clinging. The dollhouse smelled like dust and rot and something worse, charred wood, the faint acrid stink of burning insulation, and something else. Wet earth. Grave dirt. He turned away, just for a moment. When he looked back, there was another doll. Not like the first. This one was tall, thin, black-suited. No face, a void where features should have been, standing just outside the front door of the dollhouse. Mason blinked. Now it was on the porch. He reached for the house, hesitated, then pulled the tiny roof off again to look inside. The faceless figure was in the hallway. And Mason's tiny replica? Gone. He stood up, knees popping, chest tight. This was too much. The house, the real one, was creaking, floorboards shifting above him, the walls whispering. Not loud, not words, just presence. And then footsteps. Real ones. Not in the dollhouse, upstairs. Above him. Slow. Careful. Deliberate. Mason froze. The dollhouse lights flickered. And then, without warning, the lights in the real house blew out with a pop. The hallway dropped into blackness. Mason stood still, breath ragged, heart hammering like a fist on a coffin lid. He reached for his flashlight. It wasn't there. A soft noise rose from the dollhouse. The tiny staircase. He crouched, looked again. The faceless figure was climbing, one step at a time. In the real house, something heavy creaked on the floor above. He couldn't move. He knew what would happen if he did. In the dollhouse, the figure reached the second floor. Mason looked toward the rear staircase. Something waited at the top. He couldn't see it, but he could feel its shape pressing against the dark, immense and cold and eager. Then, from inside the dollhouse, inside the tiny second-floor hallway, a dim, yellow light flickered on. The bedroom light. His bedroom. He turned his head. The light in his real bedroom at the end of the hall glowed through the open door. He didn't leave it on. The air went still. From upstairs, the sound of a door creaking open. Well, careful. Like someone didn't want to wake the dead. In the dollhouse, there were now 3 dolls. The faceless one, the Mason figure, standing in the corner, facing the wall, and something new, sitting on the edge of the miniature bed, feet swinging, cracked porcelain face turned up toward him. Clarabelle. Mason screamed without sound, and in the real house, something started coming down the stairs. Chapter 7. The Archivist. The doorbell rang just after sundown. No one rang the doorbell, not since the first incident. The gate was chained, the path overgrown. The town had stopped pretending it didn't know what the museum was. Mason stood frozen in the hallway, hammer in one hand, flashlight in the other, staring at the door like it might open itself. Ding-dong. He opened it slowly. Just a crack. The man on the porch looked like a scarecrow dressed for a funeral. Long, weather-wrinkled face, eyes too bright and a face too pale. His suit was threadbare and moth-eaten at the cuffs, hanging loose over a bony frame. He held a satchel under one arm, leather so old it looked fossilized. A smell drifted off him, damp earth and mildew and something ancient, like dust shaken from a forgotten tomb. "I'm here about the collection," he said. His voice was soft, not meek, controlled. A voice that had been talking to the dead for far too long. Mason said nothing. The man smiled faintly, as if that was expected. "I'm Vellum." Mason stepped aside. The house groaned when Vellum crossed the threshold, like it recognized him. The lights above flickered, not warning, but greeting. They sat in the parlor. The wallpaper peeled behind them like old skin. The air smelled like old wax and moldy pages. Vellum placed the satchel on the floor and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. Black as pitch. No title. "I've tracked them for years," he said. "Most of my life. Since I was 9. He opened the book. The pages were hand-drawn and yellowing, filled with sketches of things Mason recognized. The doll, the mirror, the ring. But others, too. Things he didn't have yet. A chalice full of black fluid. A blindfold made from human scalp. A birdcage that held teeth. "They're sentient," Vellum whispered, tapping a drawing with one long, dirty nail. "Not alive, but aware, like tumors with eyes. They call out, they beg, they promise." Mason's skin prickled. "They're not meant to be displayed, not meant to be touched. They're fragments, remnants of rituals long abandoned, pieces of something larger." "You think your uncle collected them?" Vellum leaned forward, was trying to contain them. The floorboards above creaked. The house listened. Vellum's eyes darted to the ceiling, then back to Mason. "Once the collection awakens," he said, "it chooses a keeper. You can't leave. You won't leave. It needs someone to remember, to witness. That's what it feeds on." Mason clenched his jaw. "I didn't ask for this." Vellum nodded. "No one does. That's the trick. They don't pick owners, they pick doors." Silence hung between them, thick as wet wool. From the hallway, the faint sound of giggling, small, childlike. Vellum didn't flinch. "They've started moving, haven't they?" he asked. "Not just whispering, not just showing. They walk now. You see them out of the corner of your eye. The reflections move when you're still. And the doll? You never find her where you left her." Mason didn't speak. He didn't have to. Vellum nodded. "It's waking up, the whole house. You're nearly at the end." Mason stood. "Get out. I'm here to help." "You want to help," Mason snapped. "Then take the damn book and every cursed memory in it and burn them." Vellum's face twitched. Sad, like a man who's seen too many funerals. "You don't burn a museum, Mason. You finish it." He picked up the satchel, slid the book inside, and moved toward the door. But at the threshold, he paused. "The final item isn't something you find," he said. "It finds you." And then, quieter, "You ever wonder why Roy never left?" Mason opened the door. Vellum stepped outside, into the dusk. The moment the door shut, the house shivered. Light snapped off. The hallway stretched longer than it had before. Mason turned, and the museum display cases were open. Every single one. The mirror was no longer fogged. It was clean, reflective, and inside a version of Mason stood smiling, eyes completely black. The sherang was missing from its pillow. Clarabelle sat cross-legged on the stairs, her head tilted upward, watching. The air rippled. The house was moving just a little, like a creature dreaming under a heavy blanket. Something skittered through the walls. Mason ran to the front door, yanked. He slammed his fist against the wood. The mirror in the hallway cracked, and in the grain of the wood beneath his hand, words bubbled up like blisters. Keeper. Witness. He stumbled back. In the corner of the room, the dollhouse buzzed faintly. Inside, a new figure had appeared. And bony, wearing a gray suit. Bellum. He was standing inside the dollhouse, head tilted, one hand raised in farewell. And outside, in the dark beyond the porch, Mason thought he heard footsteps trailing away. Except they didn't fade. They multiplied. Chapter 8. The house broke first. Not all at once. Not with a crash. It came apart the way bone splinters beneath diseased flesh, quietly, persistently, like something rotting from the inside out. It started with the painting. The burning house. He found it different one morning. Barely past dawn, eyes gritty and brain fogged from another night of unblinking terror. The canvas now shimmered, wet with fresh varnish, as though someone had repainted it overnight. The fire no longer looked painted. It moved. Flames flickered, smoke curled, tiny shadows writhed in the windows, clawing at the glass. He leaned closer, the frame sizzled beneath his hand. Mason staggered back, hand blistered. The house laughed, not with sound, with movement. Walls swayed subtly, just enough to knock over the mannequin in the veil. The chandelier in the foyer spun on its own, chains clinking like a noose in wind. Floorboards warped beneath his feet, rising and falling like a living thing shifting in its sleep. He tried to scream, but the house swallowed it whole. The next night the air tasted like soot. Every breath dragged embers into his lungs. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing bone-white wood beneath, etched with fingernail gouges. In the gallery, the camber began to grow hair on its own. Long strands, jet black, curling like tendrils over the velvet cushion, wet and glistening. They twitched when touched. Visitors had stopped coming weeks ago. Still, someone knocked at the door every night at 3:17. Mason stopped checking who. He didn't want to know what they looked like, what they became when they were let in. But someone got in anyway. He found blood in the hallway, smears on the walls, a set of damp footprints, too small to be his, leading from the basement to the second floor. He never found who left them. The walls began to weep. First, a slow trickle, thick, black-red, seeping from the seams where floor met wall, where ceiling kissed corner. Then heavier, arterial, coating the baseboards, soaking into the carpet until his boots made wet, squelching sounds. The house bled, and it did not stop. One night, Mason tried to fight back. He picked the smallest object he could find, the coin. Screaming coin, do not listen. He wrapped it in a rag, placed it on a concrete block, and swung a hammer until the muscles in his arms screamed. The coin didn't break, but something else did. The mirror cracked. Not the one in the museum, the one upstairs, in his bathroom. A hairline fracture down the middle, running straight through the reflection of his eye. The light bulbs burst, one after another, exploding in rapid succession like gunfire. In the basement, something howled. It wasn't rage, it was joy. He fell to his knees. When he stood, the coin was back in its case, polished, waiting. He didn't try again. The house twisted now, hallways bent at wrong angles, doors opened to rooms that should not exist. The guest bedroom became a tunnel of mirrors, all of them warped, reflections grinning when he cried. The kitchen looped back into the parlor, endlessly. He walked in circles for hours, starving, before finding the foyer again. The artifacts moved at will. Clarabelle sat in his bed, rocking slowly. The comb appeared on his pillow, strands of his hair tangled in its teeth. The veil hung over the bathroom mirror, dripping red. When he touched it, the glass beneath whispered, "Let us in, let us through." Mason stopped sleeping. When he closed his eyes, he saw through them. He became the veil, wrapping around a throat. He became the ring, clamping onto bone. He felt the scrape of fingernails dragging across velvet, the thrill of being worn, used, fed with flesh and fear. Fury opened his eyes and screamed until his voice cracked. There was no one to hear it. The artifacts fed on him now. His memories. His guilt. They whispered about Lana, about Roy, about the girl in the wall who never made it out, about him, the man Mason used to be. A hollow now, thin and flaking like dead skin. His fingers shook constantly, his teeth loosened, the skin under his eyes grew bruised and yellowed like rot blooming from the inside. One morning he woke up in the basement, kneeling before the altar Roy had carved into the floor decades ago. His hands were raw, bloodied. A new tag sat beside him. Mason Weller. Do not. He didn't remember writing it, but the handwriting was his. Upstairs, the dollhouse lights flickered, and inside it, on the second floor, a tiny figure stood facing a mirror. Chapter 9. The Lockdown. Mason boarded the place up with hands that didn't feel like his anymore. Splinters dug beneath yellowed fingernails. Hammer strikes trembled. His breath came short and shallow, misting in the frigid air that rolled through the hallway like a disease looking for lungs to drown. Every window sealed, every door chained. Nails drove through wood warped by rot and something less explainable. The house groaned with every impact, not from age, but protest. It didn't want to be shut in. "You fed us," the walls whispered. "You opened the door." He ignored it. He pounded boards over the east parlor window, the one where the doll liked to sit and watch the road, where her silhouette sometimes moved, even after she was locked in glass. The sign in the yard, "Open," lay face down in the grass, snapped in half like a bone. He'd torn it down days ago. Still, every morning, it flickered back to life in the front window, mocking him in red. No more. The museum was closed. It had to be. But that night, they came. Not them. Not the artifacts. People. First a boy, with wide, tear-glazed eyes and dried blood on his bare feet. Maybe 16? He stood at the front gate, shivering, whispering something too quiet to hear. Mason opened the door just long enough to shout, "Go home!" The boy looked out. His mouth opened too wide, and a woman's voice spilled out. Been more excited to do it. The gate slammed shut on its own. The next night, a couple arrived. 30s, maybe. Matching smiles, glassy eyes. The woman cradled something in her arms, swaddled in yellowed cloth. A baby, maybe. Or bones. They stood there, unmoving, for 6 hours. Dawn, they were gone. In their place. A charm left on the doormat. Mason recognized it. He'd seen it in Vellum's book, drawn in red ink next to the entry for the birdcage of teeth. He needed to touch it. He poured salt over it and slammed the door. But the gate was open again. And in the dollhouse, the replica now in the center of the parlor like a tumor made of wood, a new figure had appeared on the porch. It looked like the boy. No face, just a head full of worms, painted with nail polish. The following evening, someone knocked. Not a polite knock, a slow, rhythmic pounding. 3 times. Mason didn't answer. Didn't breathe through. It stopped. When he opened the door at dawn, there was a man crumpled against the threshold. Or what had been a man. His skin was gray, torn in long strips down his arms, like something had tried to peel him apart from the elbows up. His left hand twitched, nails cracked and packed with dirt. His lips moved. No sound. Mason leaned closer. Vellum's voice came out in a wet, papery hiss. "You can't destroy them." A pause. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "You finish them. That's the only way. You have to complete it. Every piece must return." Mason dragged him inside. He was cold by the time they crossed the threshold. The artifacts pulsed, each one humming in the low, ragged frequency of hunger. Mason locked the door. Deadbolt, chain, boards, everything. The lights went out. He lit a candle. In the flicker, the museum seemed closer. The walls bent inward, ceilings hung lower, shadows reached. He walked past the cases, past the mirror where his reflection no longer matched his face, past the ring, now cracked completely in half and still warm, past the comb, which twitched like a thing alive. He walked to the basement and opened the door. The hume-rose-like breath under skin. He stepped down, 1 foot at a time, boots echoing on the cold stone like footsteps in a tomb. The shelves buzzed. The tags fluttered in wind that wasn't there. And Mason understood. His uncle hadn't collected them. Roy had been trying to keep them together, trying to lock them in one place, trying to stop them from spreading. Each artifact was a fragment, a shard of something much older. Older than Roy, older than Mason, older than language. And it was nearly whole again. Mason lit the altar candle. In the center of the slab, a tag sat, clean and new. More peace left. He knew what it meant. The last object wasn't an object. It was him. The final exhibit. Upstairs, the dollhouse lights turned on. All of them. And inside, every room was full. Every figure standing. Every mouth smiling. Except for one window. The attic. Empty. Still waiting. Chapter 10. The Final Exhibit. Mason didn't scream when the chains closed around his wrists. He welcomed them. The steel links were cold, but not dead. They slithered, yes, slithered, down from the ceiling beams like metal serpents, wrapping around his forearms, ankles, and throat with a tenderness that made his stomach crawl. They didn't bite. They embraced. The basement breathed with him. The walls, now slick with black, red ichor, pulsed like lungs stitched into stone. Candlelight flickered on the faces of the artifacts, dozens of them, lined up like parishioners watching their Messiah bleed. Mason was shirtless, barefoot, blood crusted down his side from the sigil carved into his chest, a crooked spiral dug in with the rusted tip of the screaming coin. His arms trembled, not from pain, he was beyond that, but from clarity. Cold, awful clarity. He wasn't the keeper anymore. He was the last piece. The museum was complete. He lay back on the altar stone, chest heaving, blood smearing across old carvings, etched by Roy's shaking hands decades ago. The candlelight danced in the puddles on the floor. Something massive moved in the corners of the room, just beyond visibility, slithering between dimensions, shifting through cracks in time and concrete. The house wasn't a house. It never had been. It was a mouth. A gate. Elcomtator. And now, it had everything it needed. He began the ritual with the last of his voice, lips trembling over syllables from languages that didn't belong in a human throat. The words felt like bone splinters. He spat blood between lines, coughing up something hard that clattered onto the altar. A tooth, maybe his, maybe not. The air curdled. Each artifact vibrated. Some whispered, some screamed. The mirror fogged over with faces pressing against the glass from the other side. The doll's head spun slowly, her cracked eye rolling back. The ring pulsed, glowing faintly with the light from beneath the floorboards. A thin trail of smoke began to rise from the altar. Then the basement floor cracked. Stones split like old skin. Blood sprayed from the fissure, hot and fetid. A noise, low and grinding, like the world chewing through a steel plate, rose from the pit. A shape clawed its way out. A shape made of nothing and everything. Teeth where there should be skin, eyes where there should be muscle. It had no form and yet filled the entire room. It reached for Mason. He did not move. Chains tightened. His body arched. And then stillness. One final exhale. A snap like a branch breaking underwater. And silence. For a moment, the house held its breath. Then it stopped. The light died. The artifacts stilled. The mirror cracked completely in half. The basement went dark. The house fell asleep. Years passed. The grass grew high again. Weeds crawled over the porch. The roof sagged. Trees surrounded the property like guards who'd lost their master. The open sign fell from the window and shattered against the porch. Then, one day, a car pulled into the driveway. A clean white sedan. Out stepped a woman in sunglasses and a blazer, clipboard in hand, blonde hair in a bun. A real estate agent. "No one's been in here since 2002, she said to herself. Perfect for a flip, probably just bad wiring and dust. She unlocked the gate. The chains fell to the side like they'd never mattered. He stepped onto the porch. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the air was still, cold, waiting. She coughed once. The smell hit her, musty, earthy, like dirt soaked in rust. She clicked on a flashlight. This click, the beam washed over a cracked picture frame, a shattered case. And there, in the center of the room, where the altar shouldn't have been, stood a glass enclosure. Inside it, chained at the wrists and ankles, stood a wax figure of a man. Mouth sewn shut, chest carved with a spiral, eyes wide open. The plaque below read, "Mason Weller, don't remove." Behind her the door closed with a soft click, and from the shadows near the basement, a voice whispered, "Welcome to the museum.